So, here we are once again, Teshadalek, and now where we are in the process, we're looking at the generation stage, and so some time ago, back one of our first meditations, we looked at the idea of shamatha focused on an object, a physical object, and so now we've returned to that process, and then we went to an imagined object, a white bindu between our eyebrows. And then the last one we did was a blue bindu, but also in a hollow body. So we're just adding step-by-step incremental process of getting to deity yoga practices. And so this week we'll begin looking at rather simple deity practices, and then next week we'll get into the more complex practices. And so these are outer Tantra practices. You're typically visualizing the deity as outside of yourself, as opposed to the inner deities in the highest yoga tantra that we'll look at next week. So we'll go through and look at this and some alternatives that Padmasambhava gives us in terms of these practices. And so as we look at this, the first one that he talks about is purification of Vajrasattva, which we already did as a part of our Nundo practice. And so that was an actual deity practice. However, when we did that practice, what we were focusing on was the purification. And so we did the visualization with Padmasambhava above our head, or Padmasambhava with his consort, Vajratopa, above our head. And the nectar came down into our head and throughout our body and washed out any obscurations and so forth and left us in a pure state for then going on to do the next practices, which in that case, the next one was the offerings. So Vajrasattva is a very common practice. It's often integrated into other kinds of more complex practices to do that purification early on. Sometimes it's just the 100-syllable mantra. There's not any elaborate visualization associated with it. You just imagine that he's up there and the nectar coming down and purifying as you recite the mantra. But in this case, we changed the focus. Practice, the actual text is the same, so you can go back to that. That was practice number 16. So you can go back to practice number 16 and use that. It's just that the focus is different. The focus here is on generating the deity. And so the focus is on the details, all of the stuff leading up to the mantra. Whereas before, the focus was more on the mantra itself and the purification part of it. So in this case, we're visualizing the deity, Vajrasattva, or Vajrasattva with Vajratopa. That one includes both, so they're both included there. And visualizing them in the details, the color, their hands, their garments, the adornments such as the crown and the jewelry and all of those pieces are focused on in detail. And you may need to do that a little bit at a time. It's always very helpful to get a photograph or a statue or something like that to help you in looking at and visualizing. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to look at a part of it at a time, and really get that clear in your mind, and then look away or close your eyes, either way, so that you're not looking at it, and try to visualize it clearly without actually looking at the picture. And then go back to it again. And so you alternate back and forth, over and over and over again. Once you're able to get, let's say, his face really clear, then you move on to something else. Maybe you add all of the rest of his head, for example, or you add his arms, or you add his garments, or his jewelry, or something like that. And so you do it piece by piece until you have a complete image of Vajrasattva. And usually in the text, when you're actually doing this with the sadhana, that is a part of what is there. It's a description. Sometimes the descriptions are kind of sketchy, other times they're very detailed. So from one sadhana to another that will vary a little bit, and you can always try to find another description and kind of completes that process and fills in some of the details for you if you need that. And the picture sometimes can help fill in details that are not described in the actual text itself. But these that we're looking at here, these outer tantras, are relatively simple. So they're not real complex things to try and memorize. So again, it's another step in the process. So we're going from the hollow body with a bindu to a specific hollow body with a bindu, and also then a lotus and moon seat and some syllables, tantric syllables that are represented in terms of their seed syllable, the mantra, those kinds of things in the hollow body. So it's getting a little bit more complex in how we visualize and understand this. And then when we get to highest yoga tantra, we'll take not only that, but there'll be a palace, there'll be a whole retinue in a mandala and so forth. So it begins to get even more complex. And even within those, the different tantras, there's different levels of complexity to where you get up to ones like the Kalachakra, which is probably the most complex of all of these, with a very elaborate mandala, with hundreds of deities to visualize as a part of that and so forth. So it gets very, very complex. But as you can see, if you do it step by step, you're training your mind to be able to focus on increasing elaboration, increasing amount of detail. That's the way this whole process is designed to work. Ruth?
I have never found an image of Vajrasattva that was clear. It's always been so much stuff that I can never get what the particular details are. Do you know of one?
Well, there are rather simple images out there, so we'd have to look and find one.
I've looked a lot,
but there are relatively simple ones. One of the best places to start is with one that's a drawing, because the drawings don't have as much detail. Yeah, you can Google them and find them. Snowland's a good source. You can get little cards with drawings or images of Thangka paintings, that kind of thing.
Never found one of Vajrasattva. I found many others, but not.
They are available. So, yeah. So that's the basic idea of being able to do that, the process, and then actually go ahead then with the rest of the practice, the mantra and closing prayers that are included in the sadhana and so forth. So that's the basic idea. And so what I wanted to do is read the instructions from Padmasambhava, as we have been doing here. And so this begins on page 100. And so he gives the instructions and goes on and gives a little bit of additional instruction related to meditation in general as well. So it begins, the part that's indented here. If it does not arise in that way, this is the way that we've been doing, so doing the focus in terms of our shamatha meditation, then vividly imagine in the space in front of your body of Vajrasattva, in front of you, the body of Vajrasattva. So he's right in front of you, about 1 hand span in height. So about the size of your hand. Okay? Although he appears, he is without an inherent nature. Okay? So he doesn't have a solid nature. We usually visualize deities as being kind of like a rainbow, something that's transparent that you can actually see through. Hence the hollow body that we did previously. Okay, so it relates to this kind of an approach. Like a polished crystal, he is white, clear, and of the nature of light. Focus your awareness at his heart, and visualize clearly and vividly with many short sessions before. Regarding this, the sutra synthesizing the contemplations of the Buddha says that there are inexpressible benefits simply by recalling Vajrasattva. So that's his instruction on Vajrasattva. So looking at him, getting this very clear image of Vajrasattva. But then he continues. Alternately, focus your awareness in the space in front of you on the body of Bhagavan Shakyamuni, shimmering with golden light. So there are alternatives here. So we're going to look at several possibilities, but since we've already done Vajrasattva, then that one you already have the text for that sadhana, and you can use that text for this purpose, and you're somewhat familiar with it, so that's a good one to use, but there are alternatives. And Shakyamuni Buddha is one of those. And then he goes on, the King of Samadhi Sutra says that there are also incalculable benefits in this meditative object. Or you may lucidly direct your attention simply without wavering in the space in front of you on a white syllable Hri with a visarga, which is, sometimes you'll see the syllables with two small circles immediately after. So you'll have whatever it is in a couple of small circles at the side. That's what this visarga is. At the heart of a clear, shimmering white Arya Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezi. Okay? So Shakyamuni Buddha or Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezi are alternatives there. The Sutra of Basket Weaving says that this too has incalculable benefits. And I will also give you a green Tara. I figured we needed a female deity to kind of balance out all of these male deities here, so we'll look at that one as well. And then with those meditative objects, thoughts will evenly decrease. At first, thoughts will increase, and there will be more coming and going in excitation. That is a sign that the meditative state has begun to arise. At that time, you may become disgruntled with the meditation and succumb to lassitude. There are also dangers that you may give up thinking the meditation isn't coming along for me. Thoughts in the meditation have just gotten more and more coarse. Without getting frustrated, gently engage in applying the instructions. Now, one of the things that some of the other instructions talk about is, and this gets to be something we hear from students a lot, I can't do it right. Okay? Here's the fifth instruction. There is no right. Okay? No right or wrong when it comes to doing meditation. So you can't not do it right. And whatever you're doing is a good thing. Just keep doing it, keep working on it, and it will get better, naturally. But it does take time. Now remember, it took the Buddha 6 years after having already done a lot of training before he achieved enlightenment. It took the Mahasiddhas, almost all of them, with a few exceptions, of the 84 Mahasiddhas, it took them 12 years after already having lots and lots of training. Okay? So don't assume that you can just do this overnight. If you can, that's practically a miracle. Okay? It takes time. That's like learning to play a musical instrument, a very good parallel. If you're learning to play the piano or the violin or something like that, it takes practice over and over and over. You're training your mind. If you're 30 years old, you've been doing it one way for 30 years and now you're trying to do it a different way. You're not going to change it overnight. If you're 60 years, okay, even more so. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of practice to do this. So the more you can do the practice, the more frequently you can do it. But like he did say in the instructions, you want to do short, good quality meditations as opposed to trying to do really long ones where it's not such good quality. So really focus on doing the good quality. So then he goes on and says, that increase of thoughts is the beginning of meditation. Previously, even thoughts were spinning on unceasingly. There was no century of mindfulness. So we have to be mindful. We have to be aware of these thoughts arising in our mind. So they naturally flowed out. As their increase is detected by the century of mindfulness, they are recognized. This is a desirable sign that the meditative state is arising, so gently recognize the thoughts. Even if you impede them, they will not stop. Without following after them, focus on the meditative object. So the object, in this case, is the deity. So anytime you recognize a thought coming up to interrupt that process, you just gently let go of that by focusing, refocusing. So that's the goal here, is refocus anytime something comes up, and then the thought goes away on its own. By doing so, thoughts will become more and more subtle, and they will decrease in number. So over time, as you do this, the thoughts will still come up, but they'll be more subtle. You don't follow them, you don't pay attention to them, you just recognize that, oh yeah, that was a thought, and it went away. You don't even say that to yourself, oh yeah, that was a thought. You just kind of let it go. And then it happens less and less the more that you practice. And then it goes on at the bottom of 101, even though you are meditating on the object as before, if detrimental habitual thoughts suddenly pop up, focus right on that compulsive ideation as your meditative support. So here he's saying, if you're still having some problems with this after a while, then when the the thought comes up, whatever that happens to be, focus on the thought. Make that your focus of meditation for a little bit. Whatever detrimental habitual propensities of attachment and hatred arise, recognize them, and in a relaxed way, release the mind right upon them. So you basically, the thought comes up, you pay attention to what the thought is here intentionally, and then you just relax it and let it dissolve. Okay? It becomes the object, you let it dissolve, just like when we do the dissolution process in meditating upon the deity. Okay? And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And in a relaxed way, release the mind upon them. Each time a thought arises, recognize it immediately and release it so that it naturally vanishes. If two thoughts arise, recognize them. Do not follow after anything that appears, but let it arise and be released. At times, focus on the meditative object, and at times, let thy thoughts arise and vanish. You kind of alternate methods here. While not fabricating anything in their wake, relax and release. By alternately practicing like that, the chain of compulsive ideation will become disconnected and thoughts will become fragmented. Thus, detrimental thoughts will become fewer and fine stability will arise. Meditate in that way for 3 days or as long as experience dictates. If genuine quiescence, shamatha, with those objects arises in your mind stream, train in seeking out awareness. On the whole, since it is difficult to subdue this harmful habituation to latent propensities, it is important to use numerous methods to settle the mind in its natural state. So we use the deity practice. One of the reasons that deity practice is said to be so effective is that it allows you to really focus on this. There's more things to focus on. It's easier to keep your mind focused when there's lots of things than, for example, just focusing on your breath or just focusing on a bindu at your forehead. Because there's more detail there, the mind will stay more concentrated and more focused, less distracted, which is what you want to happen. And so those other thoughts tend to then dissipate and melt away as we do it. But if they still tend to come up, alternate between the deity practice and just focusing on the thought and then letting it dissolve. Okay? So that's the basic training here in terms of this part of the instructions from Padmasambhava. So we have the alternative practices as well. And we won't go through the details on the Vajrasattva one because we've done that previously, and you can go through those as well.